Hello everyone. Today we're going to be starting our unit which is on the American Civil War and Reconstruction. You guys did very well in the last test and all of my classes, and if you remember, the North and the South did not agree about slavery. The North did not like slavery, the South wanted slavery, and as we kept expanding, they couldn't agree on what to do. Eventually this leads to a civil war, and that's just where a country fights themselves. So for the Civil War, it's Americans fighting Americans. So some of the major events that led to the Civil War. First one was the election of a Republican, Abraham Lincoln, as President of the United States. Remember, Republicans are against slavery during this time, and Lincoln was the first Republican to win. And the southern states feared Lincoln would abolish, which means to get rid of slavery. And the southern states, because they were afraid Lincoln would get rid of slavery, they began a succession. And that simply just means they left the United States. Succession means to leave, so the southern states are no longer part of the United States. And there begins to be another reason why the southern states left is disputes over tariffs. The North wanted high tariffs, which is a tax, and the South didn't want high tariffs. And there was also a famous book that came out during this time called Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was an anti-slavery book that helped build the foundation for the Civil War. So a lot of people in the North read Uncle Tom's Cabin, and they decided that they liked it, and they felt the South should no longer have slavery. This map right here just shows you the election of 1860. The red is Lincoln, which is Republican. Lincoln won all of these red states, which if you notice, they're in the North. And he also won Oregon and California, which all these states are free states. So the free states voted for Lincoln, and they do not like slavery. The southern states, which want to keep slavery, for the most part voted for Southern Democratic. But Lincoln did win more of the votes, so he became president. And this map right here shows you the succession. So gray is the southern states that seceded from the Union. Remember, seceded means to leave. So this is the Confederacy. That's what they called themselves. And so that's Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, all of these states right here. They said, you know what? We don't agree with you guys. We don't want to be part of the United States. So they formed their own country called the Confederacy. And the blue, that's the northern states. They're the ones that don't like slavery, so they're going to end up fighting the southern states. They're going to go to war. So the first major event is Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina. And this is when the Union goes into the Confederacy, which is the South. And this is the first confrontation of the Civil War. This is like a little seaport. It's next to the ocean, and the Union goes in and they attack. However, the Confederates win this war. So the Confederates win the first war, or the first battle. One of the most important battles of the war was called the Battle of Antietam. This happened on September 21st, 1862. And this is the bloodiest single day in American history. And they call it the bloodiest because it's the day that most people died. On this single day alone, the Union soldiers had 12,410 people killed, whereas the Confederate had 10,316. So combined, this is over 22,000 people that were killed in one day from this battle. The Union did win this victory, and after this war, President Lincoln gave the Emancipation Proclamation. And what this did is it freed all the slaves in rebelling states. And I meant to say this battle. After this battle, he gave freedom to all the slaves in the rebelling states, which rebelling are the people they're fighting against, and that's the South. So a war is one big long fight, but battles are just one day. A war is the whole entire thing. The next major battle is the Battle of Gettysburg. This was a 3-day war. It lasted July 1st, July 2nd, all the way to July 3rd in 1863. And this was a turning point of the Civil War. And it's a turning point because from here on out, the Union takes control. The Union starts winning all the battles. They clearly are going to win the war at this point. And this is where Lincoln issues the Gettysburg Address after the battle. And the Gettysburg Address, it's just a speech that Lincoln gives that became very popular. And he describes the Civil War as a struggle to preserve a nation that was dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. So he really believed that all men should be created equal. It doesn't matter if you're African American, Hispanic, white, everyone should be equal. And he felt that the nation was ruled by government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So he thought the government is this because you're elected by people and you should be serving the people. And one of the other important things is called General Sherman's March to the Sea. And following his capture of Atlanta, and Atlanta is a city in Georgia, General William Sherman marched his army all the way through Georgia toward the port of Savannah. And during his march, Sherman's troops destroyed and burned military depots, industry infrastructure, and civilian property. This required no supply lines and had a major impact on the Southern economy and morale. And morale is kind of like just people's feelings. People in the South started feeling pretty bad about the war. They weren't happy. And General Sherman had a lot to do with that because he pretty much destroyed everything. You see the flames in the background. He burned everything that he saw on his march down there. And next we're going to talk Appomattox, which is a town in Virginia. And this is the site where Robert E. Lee, he was the Confederate general, surrendered, which means to give up, to Ulysses S. Grant. And Grant was the Union general. In a courthouse in Appomattox, and effectively ended military operations during the Civil War. So at this point, the war is over. The Confederacy, which Robert E. Lee was the general of, surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant. Next, we're going to talk about the important leaders of the Civil War. First one is Abraham Lincoln. He was, as we talked about before, he was the Republican president. He won election in 1860. And he believed secession, which means leaving the United States, was an illegal act, and the United States was a nation, not a collection of sovereign states. However, Southerners believed that states had freely joined the Union and can freely leave. So Lincoln said when the Southern states left, no, you are not allowed to leave. You're part of the United States. We're part of a nation. You don't have the choice to leave. Whereas Southerners, they felt, you know what? We decided to join the United States. Now we can leave the United States if we want. And Lincoln, his leadership, his first address, he said, "In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war." So when he became president, he knew the United States was going to go to war with each other. And when he first became president, his goal was to keep the Union. He didn't want to go to war. But later on, he knew it was going to go to war, and his goal was to end slavery and expand citizenship. So when it says expand citizenship, he wants to give citizenship to slaves, because right now slaves do not have citizenship. Another key leader is Jefferson Davis. He was originally a senator, but he became the president of the Confederate, which is the South, States of America. So remember, the Confederate States of America, those are all the states that succeeded. They said, we don't like America, we don't want to be here, so we're going to form our own country. And the Confederate was the country that they formed, and they elected Jefferson Davis as their president. Another key leader is Ulysses S. Grant. So he was a United States military commander who won victories over the South. So whenever we say Union during the Civil War, that's the United States. But the Union military commander was Ulysses S. Grant. Robert E. Lee, he was the Confederate general of the Army of Northern Virginia, and he opposed secession. He didn't think the states should leave, but he didn't believe the Union should be held together by force. So he didn't think it was right for the president to send troops in to force them to stay. So even though he was against secession, he ended up leading the Confederate Army. He was the general. Another key leader was James Ewell Brown Stewart. You guys are familiar with him because he goes by Jeb Stuart, J-E-B. He was a graduate of West Point, which is a college. He served under Robert E. Lee, and he's known as the greatest cavalry officer ever foiled in America. And he was killed in battle in 1864. And as you guys know, he had a high school named after him, Jeb Stuart High School, where we go. But because he fought for the South, a lot of people don't feel as appropriate and that he represents slavery, so we're changing our name. So he's not going to have Jeb Stuart named after him anymore. And the last key leader is Frederick Douglass, and he was a former enslaved African American. So that means he used to be a slave. However, he became educated, he went to school, he got his freedom, and he became a prominent abolitionist. You've seen this word a couple times, but abolitionist is someone who was against slavery. So if you were against slavery, you were called an abolitionist. And he urged President Lincoln to recruit former enslaved African Americans to fight in the Union Army. So if there's people in the North, which there was a lot of people who left the South who were slaves and went to the North where they can be free, Frederick Douglass said you should get them to fight in the Army because they're very passionate about it. They know people in the South maybe who were slaves, but he encouraged the president to recruit former enslaved African Americans to fight in the Union Army. All right, if you guys have any questions, let me know. Move on to the next part.